In this video, I will introduce you to the General Product Safety Regulation, and especially how it compares to the existing GPST. So the GPSR, it sets safety labeling and documentation requirements for all consumer products sold in the European Union. And that is the case even if there is no, say, product-specific regulation or directive that applies to the product. So in short, the GPSR is extremely important because even if your product is a product that does not require, say, the CE mark, it will still be affected. Now, as I mentioned, it does replace the existing directive, the General Product Safety Directive, or the GPSD, and will do so from the 13th of December 2024. So the GPSD has been in place, I believe, since 2001 or something like that. So it's been 2 decades. It's been in existence for 2 decades, and the GPSD, just like the GPSR, sets essential safety requirements for all consumer products sold in the European Union, regardless of whether or not product-specific directives or regulations apply. So what I'm getting to here is that the GPSR is not coming from nowhere. It is building on what was already, well, the foundation that was already in place through the GPSD. Now, in short, that means if you're selling in the EU, you should already be compliant with the GPSD. But what the GPSR does, what it changes is that it's more detailed. Let's look into what that means in practice. So when it comes to responsible person, now what this is referring to is the different types of entities that are responsible for ensuring compliance. And this is essentially reflecting the times that we live in. Early 2000s, we had manufacturers, we maybe had representatives, we had distributors within the EU, and we also had importers. Well, we didn't have Amazon. We didn't have cross-border e-commerce directly from Asia, for example, which we do now. We didn't have fulfillment centers, and that's also what you see in the GPSR. It expands responsibility not just to manufacturers, importers, distributors, and so on, but to fulfillment service providers. This means that companies storing goods for distribution within the EU will now assume some responsibilities to verify that the products that they store and ship are compliant. That's new. Well, it is mentioned in the existing market surveillance regulation. That's a few years old now, but the GPSR takes it even further. Provider of an online marketplace. That has pretty big implications if you're selling on, say, Amazon, and I will explain why in a bit. And an entity that modifies a product. So what this means is that they are broadening the scope of different types of companies that will need to verify compliance or will be responsible for compliance one way or the other. Now, if you're a manufacturer or an importer, well, you will be responsible as you were previously. The difference is that you can perhaps expect compliance checks also from your fulfillment center or Amazon. Anyway, I will get to that in a bit. Now, let's look at the labeling requirements. So with the GPSD, now this is already in place. You need to label the product with the identity and details of the producer. That producer can also be an importer, just to be clear. Product reference, that's a product name. Details of the batch of products. That's a batch number. Warnings and warning labels, warning instructions where necessary. If you look at the GPSR, it's as you can see, it's building on the existing foundation, but it is more specific. Product type, batch or serial number. Manufacturer's name, registered trademark or registered trade name. When it comes to the details, they now, for the first time, they specify that you need to provide the manufacturer's postal and electronic address, both. Warnings, and also age suitability for children. So as you can see, it goes beyond what was already in place with the GPSD, and I think that's a good thing. I think it's good because it provides detail. Previously, it was not 100% clear. Should I include the address? What kind of contact point should I specify? What exactly does details of the producer mean? Now it's more clear. That's good. Documentation. Um, that's quite big because from now on, well, they do require that you create something called technical documentation. That includes risk assessment, a list of different standards, and the details can be found in the what I believe is the final draft of the GPSR on the European Commission website. Now, we'll see if there will be some exemptions, how enforcement will work, but now I haven't read every single word. This is based on research from my team members. But if it is the case, that you actually need to provide technical documentation for every single product, and that's going to be a pretty big deal. Not necessarily because it's difficult, but because it has to be done for every single item. Now, I'm not saying that that will be the case, but we'll see. It is mentioned there, and my understanding is that it is indeed a requirement. Technical documentation, if you're selling anything with a CE mark, you should already have that in place. But well, the difference here is that you're selling, say, fitness products, you sell children's products, or anything really. Then yeah, now there are provisions concerning technical documentation, instructions, and test reports. When it comes to lab testing, it is essentially required. That was already the case with the GPSD, which it does state that you need sample testing, which in practice, for most of you, that means you need third-party lab testing. In short, you can't just say that a product is compliant. You need to verify that the product is compliant. So there's a lot of other changes, but this is, let's say, some of the main changes that you as a brand owner, as an e-commerce company, need to take into consideration. I also created a brief summary here. Again, I'm not saying this is exhaustive. I'm not saying this is everything, but just to, let's say, warm you up, get you ready for the GPSR as is coming up in 2024. Now, step one is that you will still need to verify compliance with the harmonized standards. I believe at the current time, June 2023, we could not find a list of harmonized standards under the GPSR. But there is a list of harmonized standards, or I believe they use the term reference standards under the GPSD. But I believe at some point they will publish that, and I can imagine that essentially all of the standards listed, reference under the GPSD will also be transferred to the GPSR. But perhaps it will update some, perhaps it will go beyond that. We will see. But in any case, you will need to verify compliance with harmonized standards. And I should also note that if there are no harmonized standards in place for said product, you still need to you need to follow other standards. These can be non-harmonized EU standards. These can be parts of standards for other products, say apply EN 71 to different types of children's products. It's fairly common. Or even look outside of the EU, look at ASTM, look at IEC, look at ISO standards, maybe even UL. So that doesn't change. Technical documentation and instructions, I just mentioned that. Create updated label files as they go into more detail now. And you may also need something called an authorized representative if you are outside of the EU, you don't have an EU entity. Now, this is also a fairly significant update, and this is in Article 16 of the GPSR. A product covered by this regulation shall not be placed on the market unless there is an economic operator established in the Union who is responsible for the task, essentially ensuring compliance. And this is, I think, this is referring to the market surveillance regulation, by the way. But what it does is that it expands the requirement to have a authorized representative from products that are CE marked to products covered by the GPSR, which is essentially all consumer products. So is this going to make it mandatory for every single company selling cross-border into the EU to have an authorized representative in the European Union? Well, perhaps we will see. We will see. This video is, let's say, it's just to warm you up, and this is based on us, quickly looking through the final draft that was published, I think in May or something. So there may be more to it, but I have been discussing this with companies such as 24 hours AR, and this is also their understanding, and their understanding is also that the EU is now going to place more responsibility on the authorized representatives. It's no longer enough for them just to cash in, send an invoice, and then have their details printed. At least that's what they told me. And instead, they will be more responsible for verifying compliance. What does that mean for companies outside the EU? Well, it could mean that it will be more expensive, because if more workload, if more risk is transferred to the representative, then they will need to charge for that. So yeah, we'll see how this will develop, but it's quite significant. Finally, let's look at Amazon and the GPSR. I have received reports from our customers indicating that Amazon is already making sellers aware of the GPSR. So what's the connection here between Amazon and GPSR? Well, the thing is, as I mentioned, GPSR has extensive provisions when it comes to marketplaces, and the way that online marketplaces, must verify that products are safe and fully compliant. Amazon is one such marketplace. And they also provide, there's a lot of details and in the GPSR when it comes to the different aspects that marketplace operators must cooperate with market surveillance authorities in the EU. What does this mean in practice? Now, we can only speculate, but it is likely that Amazon will become even more strict. Would become even more strict when it comes to verifying compliance. Again, the GPSR is not, say, the Toy Safety Directive that is only concerning toys, or say the Low Voltage Directive that only applies to certain electronics. The GPSR is a regulation that covers essentially all consumer products. This is why it's very significant. Could this imply that Amazon will require that you submit, say, technical documentation, test reports, label photocopies, both of the product and the packaging? Maybe they will standardize that. It's too early to say, but this could really have a significant impact in the way that you, as an importer, as a manufacturer, as a cross-border seller, as an Amazon seller, will need to deal with product compliance. Now, I recommend that you go to the European Commission website and you find a GPSR page. You can go to the previous slide, you can see that link and read it for yourself. That's my recommendation. I haven't read the whole thing, but this is based on some, let's say, initial research from my team. And what I wanted to do with this video is to give you a heads up, but I want to underline that I'm not covering every single aspect in this video. Now, if you have any questions, you can write a comment on YouTube or directly in the comment section on compliancegate.com. Thank you.